Hello gentles and ladymen, I am Bison Gaming and I am back with a new video on our modding of YOMI Hustle journey. That is right, we are back today with Horaloo and we have some more stuff for you to do today. Okay, so I have been busy while I've been busy between episodes, let me say that. I have only added one new move since we played, but it has been a pain in the ass. Now, originally, it is not one attack here, it is not an aerial attack, it is actually a super. So we're just gonna let everybody get a little bit of super level here, and here is our new attack. It is called Axe Hurl. Now let me tell you, this attack has actually been a massive pain in the ass. Now the original intent of this video was to make a video on how to make a projectile, because that is what the Axe Hurl is, but this turned out to be so problematic, this attack did, that I ended up not even remotely being able to finish or get it right when I was trying to record and figure it out myself. And this attack actually is so complex that it took me about a week to actually fully create with everything that I needed. I don't even remember half the stuff I did to make this attack work, but I'm going to recommend to you guys that you do the same thing I did when it comes to create a projectile, and that is to use a unique mechanic in YOMI Hustle modding called Friendship, where you go to your only move is modding and desperately beg somebody to help you, or look up some of the simple projectile guides in there and just go about it that way, because honestly they will go about it in a far simpler explanation than I will. But it turns out this whole process is a hell of a lot more complicated. It turns out this whole process is a hell of a lot more complicated than one might originally think when you just do the axe hurl thing and add a projectile to it and then create the projectile. So it turns out, and I'll give you a simple basic idea of the complexity to this, but we had to write a shit ton of custom code for this attack, and then we had to create a whole new scene. So you know how you have your character scene? We had to create a new scene for the projectile and have it have its own code. Here's all the code for the base projectile, and here's all the code for the actual projectile attack node, and it was just an absolute nightmare. But what I will say is, if you want to add a projectile to your attack, engage in jolly cooperation and try to get somebody to help explain it to you in concrete terms, because I really cannot. Now, during this process, I did actually learn a couple things that are relevant and important. For one, I figured out how to make super moves that actually cost levels of super, instead of just having a instead of just creating super moves that show up in the super bar and are otherwise just normal attacks. So we actually cost super now. It turns this thing is not here normally, but there is a way to create it by adjusting a little something in the code. I also figured out how to make hyper armor, which was a fair bit more complex than simply hitting a checkbox in here somewhere, but a relatively easy one as well. However, this is not the only super attack I plan on creating, and I want to go through the process of actually creating another super attack and attacks with hyper armor, and have an in-depth video showing exactly how to go about creating those, instead of me just summarizing it here post-mortem, you know, as I create this video. So I'm not going to be going over how to make a super and an attack with hyper armor yet. That will actually be next video. So I've created this, so I'm not talking about how to create a projectile today, and I'm not talking about how to make a super move or an attack with hyper armor. So what the hell is this video about? As you've probably surmised by the title, the second part of this video is something that I am qualified to talk about and have some knowledge on. and that is planning a character's movesets. Now, because believe it or not, it is actually hard to plan a character's moveset. You can, of course, always just plan it, be like, okay, he'll have this move and this move and this move and this move, but it's not quite as simple as that if you want your character to be good and popular and well-liked by the community. So I created this little diagram here. We'll be going over this a little bit more in depth later, but this is kind of just like a range indicator that we can use when designing attacks that I have created. But for now, let's just go to a blank canvas here, and we'll talk about how to create a character design, design a character's moveset. Okay, so when creating your character's moveset, there are a couple core principles or core laws that you need to adhere to and keep in mind when designing your character. First is you need to have an established identity for your character. This means you can't create a character that just has that has everything. You can't create a character that is good at everything and wins in every range area. You need to establish a core identity and a theme to base your character's movesets around. My character's theme for Horalu is that he is a tanky mid-range bruiser, right? He attacks with melee attacks that have pretty decent range for them as being melee attacks. And he's kind of like a tanky armored version of Cowboy, is kind of how I think of him, with less mobility. So you need to establish a core identity for your character. The second core principle is that your character needs to feel good to play. It needs to be fun for the user, and it can't be too frustrating to fight against, or nobody will want to download your character for fear that somebody will use your character against them. So feel good be fun. Feel good / be fun to play with. If your character is incredibly frustrating and annoying to fight or to fight with, then nobody is going to get your character, right? So you can't have characters with too aggressively annoying mechanics. You can have a couple annoying mechanics in, because every character has an annoying mechanics, you know. That's generally, if you get hit by something and you get hit by a long string of attacks, that's generally pretty annoying to the person on the receiving end, but there is a acceptable, tolerable level to it that you need to stay with it. Core principle number 3 is to simplify the moveset. This means don't have a moveset that is too complex. Don't add 10 billion attacks that are or different chains of attacks that are locked behind other attacks, and make your character too complex to play, or have too complex of systems. Your character, to feel in order for your character to feel fun and be good, you need your movesets to be simple so that it's relatively easy to pick up. Having a character with too big or too complex of a moveset where every single attack, where half of the moveset's attacks are locked behind complex chains, is not a character that anybody wants to play or play against, because nobody in the party knows what attack is coming next. So a good general principle is to keep most of the attacks that the character has available most of the time. The next one is kind of the opposite of simplify the moveset, and that's have enough moves that you can do stuff. So you can't just have 4 attacks and call it a day on your character. This makes really crappy mods that nobody wants to play. Think of like Garfield, for example. There's a character mod that you can download for Garfield. It's literally just, Garfield the orange tabby cat. And I get it, it's kind of a mean character. But it has 1 attack, and that's not enough. You also can't just have, 3 attacks. You probably want a good 9 basic attacks and probably a good 6, 7, 8, 9 special attacks as well. And you want to have probably, in regards to simplifying the moveset, you want to have just a couple super crazy attacks that your character is based around mechanically, and generally those are going to be your supers, right? The super special stuff. You generally only want to have 1 to for at the absolute maximum supers. You don't want to bog down the character with too many supers or too many things that are locked behind supers. I would just have but at the same time, you don't want to have too little supers. I think Horaloo is going to have 2 supers. I think that is the perfect number. He's got a 1 costing super with the projectile that I showed you earlier, and he'll have a more expensive super that goes into a chain of attacks that I have in mind, and that's good enough for me. But you as your character need to have enough moves that you can solve that you can solve enough problems with your moves with your character. And that leads into our next core principle, which is that an attack needs to solve a problem. It needs to have a purpose. And this also just means chew the fat. Get rid of fat. Okay? Now, what this means is that if your attack is not designed around solving a specific problem that the character is going to have, then it is not a good attack. And I can think right off the bat of a great example of this, but I'll talk about that a little bit later. I just want to go over the basic set right now. So a lot of people, when they are creating mod characters, a lot of mod characters are trying to be are characters from other games or series that are ported in, right? And when you do that, you want to add a whole bunch of those characters' moves, because those characters' moves are cool, and it's why you're putting them in the game, is that you can use their moves in Yomi Hustle, right? But there is a problem with this, and that is that not every move that your character has in the show or game or movie or wherever they're from is going to work in Yomi Hustle, because not all of them solve a problem. You need to figure out which moves that you want to port over to your character, and you need to be fine with not having everything attached to your character. Attached to your character making it over. You need to be fine with keeping only the attacks that actually solve an issue. And I can think of a absolutely wonderful example of this, and that is probably in what is, and I'm going to show you guys this. I'm going to cut to it real quick. But basically, if an attack doesn't, the last thing here is, if an attack doesn't solve something, a problem, get rid of it. Because if you have attacks that don't do anything, all that is going to do is bog down the moveset of the character and give a whole bunch of attacks that don't matter, and that the user is going to feel like never actually does anything or gets anywhere. And I can think of no better example than the character Slugcat. Slugcat is a mod character that somebody created as an imported character from Rainworld, which is a fantastic game, by the way. I'm actually considering playing it on the channel. This character is a primary example of having attacks that don't matter and don't do anything and never ever see use. Besides these kind of weird color coding issues, there are a lot of issues with Slugcat. So we have this close range attack here, which is called Bop, which is fine. A lot of characters need a very fast close range attack in order to do stuff, but you only really need one of these, right? But then we have attacks that are like this, that are called Tube, which, you know, it's not clear what this attack does. At first, it's literally just a hit. You just turn yourself into a tube and then go back and forth. This is obviously a mechanic from Rainworld, but despite what this attack looks like, it doesn't actually have any kind of dodge frames. It doesn't have any kind of hyper armor. It doesn't have any more range than our Bop does. It doesn't do more damage. It has no purpose. Same thing. Spin combo, on the other hand, is quite nice. But take a look at Whip here. Whip has the same range as Bop, except it's slower. and as such, it has no functional purpose. We have Nap here, which is a kind of, it's kind of like a hustle, except instead of raising your super level, it raises your karma bar, and that's very cool. But we also have an attack called Fake Nap, which has the exact same animation, but it does nothing. So why does it exist? This character has a ton of examples of this, of attacks that never see use because they serve no purpose in the moveset. And also this character does no damage, but that's a thing for another day. But you need to keep this in mind with your character, right? If your attack doesn't serve a purpose, it shouldn't be in the game. So instead of this for whip, this is a great animation, right? So why not speed it up a little bit so that the whip happens immediately and is a similar concept to bop, but then have bop be a slower, heavier attack that travels some distance, so that we actually have a little bit of variety in these movesets, you know. That's kind of what I'm talking about, where if an attack doesn't need to exist or doesn't serve to solve an issue that another attack doesn't do better, there's no point to the attack and it shouldn't exist with your character. And these are the core principles to keep in mind when you are designing your character's movesets. So next we need, let's talk a little bit more about this one right here, establishing an identity. So when you're establishing an identity, this can obviously have to do with your character design, or it can have to do with a couple very core mechanics that your character is going to play around with. Horlu is going to have lots of hyper armor, but his real established identity that I am creating for him is to have a character with a lot of stomp attacks. When playing against Horlu in Elden Ring, Horlu does a lot of these stomps. It's kind of what he is known for, where he will stomp the ground like that and create big shockwaves across the ground. Such as this right here. This is a great example of him going for a stomp. And I want these stomps to be an integral part to the character. They're going to need to have some hyper armor and stuff like that. And the idea behind them is that they are going to be very low to the ground, the attacks that are difficult, that are impossible to parry but are possible to block, but they can be jumped over easily, and that's going to put pressure on the opponent because the attack is going to be relatively quick with a decent amount of range, and it's going to be a decent opener that forces the opponent to react by either blocking low or by jumping into the air, where I might potentially have a little bit more easier of a time hitting them. And that is gonna kind of the established core identity is the stomp. So if I were to simplify my character down as much as possible to where I could describe my character in as few as possible words that I am planning on creating, he is going to be an aggressive pressurer. He's going to put lots of pressure on you. His core special mechanic is going to be based around stomping the ground, causing low damage, causing relatively low damage but hyper armor shockwaves along the ground. He's going to have lots of hyper armor, and he is going to be a mid to close range fighter. And that is our character's established identity. And every single attack that we do that obeys these other commandments needs to circle back and make sure that it is also in line with the established identity of our character. Because if you do something that is against your character's established identity, it stands out as weird and unnatural. Alright, now that we talked about the core principles, let's go back to this chart that I made earlier. This is kind of a range thing that we can use to kind of show the basic principle of our character. So everything within this blue circle here, consider these characters standing far apart here to be the same distance, the same starting distance, the spawn distance from when characters spawn apart from each other. So they're decently close to each other, but you know, a ninja is not gonna be able to just punch somebody, you know. Everything within this blue circle that takes about halfway, we are going to call close range. Everything that is within this purple circle, right here is going to be mid-range. This covers from the 50% to a little bit past the character's moveset. Attacks that are here are going to be considered mid-range, and then everything outside this purple circle, include the rest of the map represented by this red circle here, is long range. A example in Yomi Hustle of a close range fighter is Ninja. A lot of his nunchucks don't extend very far past this circle here. A perfect example of a mid-range fighter is Cowboy, because a lot of his attacks can go all the way out here, or hit in this kind of general range. And he has a lot of attacks that can hit. He has a huge variety of attacks that can hit players right away on the first turn where you stand. And then he has a couple attacks that reach outside here, and then he has like one or two attacks that reach out here. And same with Cowboy, and same with Ninja. Of course, you're going to want to mix and match. You don't want all of your moves to be in here if you're a close range fighter. You generally want one or two long range attacks just to keep everything balanced. And then obviously a perfect example of a long range fighter is Wizard, because he's just going to stand way the fuck back here and spam lots and lots of projectiles at you from every which direction. So now we've created my established identity of a close to mid-range fighter, and I'm actually going to be going against my advice, and I don't plan on having any attacks that are out here. Now at max speed, my axe can hit from about here to here, so it covers the whole mid-range circle, but that is just barely it. My attack range on all of my attacks should extend from here to about here at most, and then the other way as well, if it's a big area of effects that leads around me. So when you're designing your character, you need to keep in mind what I was saying, the general purpose of the attack. And every character, regardless of what range that you want them to be, is going to need at least two fundamentally basic attacks. And that is going to be the close to mid-range openers. You're going to want two of them because you're going to want one that hits low and one that hits high, because that is going to create the basic 50-50 chain opener where your opponent has to decide which one you're going to do and react accordingly by blocking low or blocking high. We're going to have just these two basic attacks to start here. Now, Horalu currently only has one of these, and that is the low slash. I plan on adding a mid heights to high height slash as an opener a little bit later. That's basically it's going to be one of the next attacks that I create, probably. Another thing that you're going to want to add is if you are a specialized close range fighter, or a character that is supposed to win in a lot of the close range scenarios, you're going to want to have an attack that hits right around here. And you're going to want this attack to be much faster than the three basic than your other two basic attacks, and this is so that you have an attack that can help you win a lot of engagements in the hyper close range. For example, after somebody blocks your attack and both characters go back to neutral on the same frame right next to each other in hyper close quarters. This is what you're going to be using when you're not using a grab. Right, this is when you think your opponent is going to try to avoid a grab by jumping, you use this little bop attack here, and that is what you do. It's very reminiscent of Cowboy's Pommel Strike, and it's why I created the Pommel Strike on Horalu's character, because I had this specific situation in mind. So with that said, we have three core basic attacks here that we can plan out and add over here. So let's go over here and just type in basic attacks and start putting in what we want. We're going to need a low slash, which is done. So I'm going to put a star next to it. We are going to need a close range bop, which we also already have, and we are going to need a mid/high slash. So at the close range bop is optional depending on your character, but this low and medium high slash should be just basic close range things on every character. No, this one doesn't have. This one shouldn't have a star. Now, as for what frame you want to actually make these a lot of these land on, you actually want these to be very, very quick. And the reason is because they need to be under a certain speed in order to be parryable. And your basic attacks should, for the most part, be parryable. They are your openers, and your opponent, if they predict which one you do, should be rewarded accordingly if they defend against you. And the key... Now, if for those of you who actually don't know how parrying works, you only parry an attack if you block an attack on the same. If you block an attack and you input the block command on the same frame or before the frame that the enemy attacked you. So, in other words, if an attack is already on its way to you, then you can't parry it if you block retroactively in visible reaction to the attack. With projectiles, you just have to block within 3 frames, but for melee attacks in particular, the parries that you can actually punish with, you need to block on the same frame or before the attack actually comes out. And because blocking only has 10 active frames, it means that the only attacks that you can parry off the rip are actually attacks that hit you in less than 10 frames. So most of your attacks that you want to be parryable and punishable on your character need to hit in about 8, 9 to 10 frames. That makes them decently reactable, but also parryable. So that's where you're going to want to aim for most of your attack speeds, is 8, 9 to 10 frames. Is when they should hit. But for the close bop, you can make that one a lot faster, obviously, because it's designed to win in very close-up engagements where everybody is doing the grab game. So we can call the low slash 9 frames. The mid slash can be also 9 frames, or maybe 8, something similar to that. Whereas the close bop, you don't want it to hit faster than a grab. That's the key. So you want to make this one probably around 5 frames, because I think grabs, if I'm not mistaken, hit on the 4th frame. I think my close range bop, it hits on the 6th frame. But when we go back here, your opponent is not always going to be directly in front of you, are they? So you're going to want attacks that cover a variety of area. You're going to want attacks that come up here. You're going to want attacks that carry you forwards. So you're going to want forward momentum with your attacks, so that they can actually reach over here. And that's what I have with my dashing uppercut, and it's an attack that carries my character forward and then swings and then swings for a total it's a close range attack technically, but the actual effective distance it covers is about right here. You might want attacks that, instead of covering distance, make your character retreat but then attack on the way out. Those ones are probably going to be pretty close range, and they're going to be probably used for escaping projectiles or repositioning yourself in a different spot. You might want attacks that cause you to jump in the air and then go down. Stuff like that. There's quite a variety of different things you can do when you're designing your attacks, but you want to cover that's going to depend on the established identity of your character. For my character, I'm not a particularly mobile character, and I'm a character that so any of these retreating attacks are not going to be for me. So I'm not going to be doing any of those. On the other hand, I'm an aggressive character with lots of hyper armor, so a lot of my attacks are probably not going to be jump attacks, but attacks that push me closer to the opponent, or attacks where I stand my ground and try to tank a hit and hit the opponent anyway, and hit the opponent through that. The stomps in particular are going to hit along this, not that high range, but they're going to hit probably around here, and be low enough that the opponent can jump over them. And stuff like that. I plan on having the stomps be longer than 10 seconds, so they can't be parried. I'm planning on making them not cancelable, but in exchange give them hyper armor. and then you can't chain stomps into each other is kind of how I'm planning. But I'm going to need, for starters, in basic attacks, I'm going to want to add for my character's established identity a stomp and an attack to help deal with people in the air, which is going to be a relatively quick high arcing slash. So I put a note here that the stomp can't chain into itself. We're going to have to remember to put that in. And we're also going to put a note that it needs armor. And that it needs... that it can't be cancelled. Be free cancelled. And we're going to plan for this attack to hit probably at around frame 12 of this attack. The high arc slash we're going to want to be relatively quick. So we're going to set this one to be... we want this one to be potentially parryable. So we're probably going to set this one to be around 8 frames, just like our mid to high slash. Maybe 9 frames. A variant that I want for the stomp that also can't chain into other stomps is going to be a aggressive stomp. It's basically going to be a stomp minus the hyper armor, without hyper armor. But it moves you forward, and you'll be able to use this to chase opponents that are trying to retreat and create that are trying to create distance and help keep you engaged in the fight for longer. So you're trading hyper armor for forward momentum, for more forward momentum. It's also going to be slower. Because hyper armor and being able to tank and face opponents without fear is kind of this character's identity, we're also going to want a variance to the high arc slash that we have here. Specifically, I'm going to want a another high arc slash. I'm going to call it a heavy high slash. That's going to be just like the high arc slash, but slower and with hyper armor. And it's going to hit harder. And it's going to cover a slightly different arc, perhaps right above our character. And this is just so that we have a little bit of variety, or so that we have more than one attack that's that lasts above us, so that we can chain a variety of attacks together and still hit in the same general area. Because you want to have a couple attacks that hit in similar zones. So this one might come from the other direction, for example, and go up this way. And this is so that we can chain these attacks into each other without having to deal with the penalty that comes with using the same attack in a combo. So with this, we have a stomp that covers this square here and a stomp that covers this square here. We have our 3 core attacks, and we have our 2 high attacks. Oh, lastly, we actually need to add the attack that we have, which is the dashing uppercut, which will cover, which the idea behind is that it covers distance and then jumps into the air. So that'll be 8 total basic attacks. And then we're also going to need to design to design all of these. We're going to need to design similar attacks with when we're in the air, but one of our identifying factors is that we want to be grounded. I forgot to add this one, but it means that we're going to have a lot of our aerial attacks be focused on either getting to the ground ourselves, grounding the opponent, and stuff like that. We're going to add a couple attacks that will allow us to juggle or keep in the air, but not too many. A lot of these attacks are going to focus on grounding the opponents, knocking them down or knocking yourself down, which is what we have in the attack that we created already. I'm not going to cover these. I'm probably not going to cover these in as great a detail in regards to this, but we have an attack that hits here right now. But I want an attack that'll send our character forwards for a swing, and then we're also going to want a couple basic swings like up and just all around us for another one. So we're going to need at least probably 5 or 6 different aerial attacks. So I'm just going to make a note here that we have 8 attacks, 8 basic attacks. And each and every single one of these attacks, if you remember, solves a problem. Again, every single one of these attacks has a very specific purpose. But it means that since our character is designed to be on the ground, the number of aerial basic attacks we should have should not be larger than 8. It should probably be smaller than 8. It shouldn't even be 8. It should be smaller than 8. The attack we have right now here is it's called Ring the Bell. So I'm just gonna put a downward slam, or I think it's called Earthward Slam. So we'll just use that. So that's gonna hit below us and and stuff like that. We're gonna put a star to show that we already have this one. Another attack that I want in the basic air attacks is what I'm going to call a dunk attack, and it's pretty self-explanatory. You're going to want to. It's going to be an attack that kind of dunks the opponent. You know, you put the axe, you swing the axe above them, you hit them. The idea is that it hits them from above and then sends them flying straight down into the ground. But unlike the Earthward Slam, it's going to be an attack where we kind of like dash forwards a little bit and get some distance there. So I'm going to call it the dunk attack. I don't really have the frame data planned out yet, but that's what but we're going to add a dunk attack. Another attack that we are going to want absolutely is what I'm going to call a comet attack, which is basically once again, it's pretty self-explanatory. An attack where we can use it and then immediately just fly straight to the ground and ground ourselves immediately. And this is going to be one of our best friends when we are being staggered well high into the air and really need to ground ourselves in order to survive. So we're going to have a comet attack that's where it hits in a big line below us and has the intention of just going straight down immediately. Importantly, I want the comet attack to do less damage than Earthward Slam. Because we don't want to make Earthward Slam redundant. This goes right back around towards every attack needs to have a purpose. If we make the comet an attack that has more range, grounds you better in the Earthward Slam, and it hits harder, then Earthward Slam has no purpose. So now with our dunk and our comet and our Earthward Slam, we have attacks that hit in front of us and below us. Mostly below us, though. But our opponent is not always going to be below us. So we're going to need an attack that... we're going to need a basic high arc. And we're going to need... And we're going to... And I'm just going to have the high arc serve to be as an attack that hits kind of all around us. It's going to be in like a full 180-degree arc above us, right? So that will cover that. And it'll also have a little bit of added momentum that puts us up in the air a little bit further, so that'll be nice. And lastly, we're going to just want an aggressive forward arc. And this is so that we can... It'll have a similar structure to Dunk, but it will serve to extend our time in the air or cover more distance in the air instead of immediately sending you and your opponent into the ground. And the purpose of this is so that we can use this as a form of dodging attacks that we need to be in the air, of dodging attacks that might hit us if we don't spend long enough time in the air. So it'll just have an extending aerial purpose, essentially. And we can differentiate them by having the aggressive forward arc go from have a attack animation that goes from low to high, whereas the dunk obviously is going to go from high to low because it dunks, you know, and that's how we can differentiate those. And I think that'll about do it. So that creates 5 basic air attacks for us. All right, next I'm going to talk about the supers for our character, and these, once again, all of the attacks need to apply to the core principles, but the supers are allowed to break the core principles to a degree because they are further ingrained in the established identity of your character, and also they don't make any attacks irrelevant because you require to use a resource to use them, so they can be just better versions of any of these attacks by nature because they cost a resource to send, and if you don't have that resource, these attacks therefore are still usable and important. So our super attacks are allowed to break rules, at least to a degree, because they don't by nature. But we want to keep these restricted to follow the core principle of simplify the moveset. So we're going to not want too many of these because it will just bog down the player if they get 1 level of super and have 20 new fucking options to play with. And that's also not good for their opponent either because they're going to need to check every single one of these in order to make a smart and effective decision for themselves. So we're only going to create 2 supers. So I'm going to create a new section and just do the supers. Our first super is Axe Hurl, which is a special attack that I have created in our thing. Now, in accordance with our established identity, Axe Hurl and the second one that I'm going to create that I haven't quite named yet are both going to have hyper armor. But the general idea behind our projectile that we have created, I actually created a ton of different animations for this. I created the actual axe spin, but Horlu just fucking hurls his axe at somebody. That's the basic idea. That's as simple as I can fucking explain it. But it's a little bit more than that. So you have a little bit of free aim to this, and you can control the projectile's speed and distance. But but this attack goes through other projectiles. It has hyper armor, so that we can keep this attack up should we get hit by it. And then after the projectile travels a certain distance, or if it hits something, we teleport there immediately, and that applies to walls, floors, everything. And this is going to, so you can basically use this to spend super to keep up with your opponents, chase them down. Once again, it's very similar. Beat their projectiles, get past a thick wall of projectiles, whatever the situation may call for. This attack is going to solve. So you can see, even if we shoot it up, after it travels a certain distance, we're going to teleport to it. So now we go back to our planner. We're going to say Axe Hurl plus teleports. And it has armor, and beats other projectiles. And these attacks are your supers, so feel free to go pretty decently crazy with them. But our other super that we're going to create is basically just a close range super attack that's going to bruise and hurt your opponent. And it's gonna and I'm just gonna, for now, I'm going to call it Earthquaker, because it's going to have quite that kind of effect on them. So the idea behind this attack is that it's going to be that I have behind this attack is that it's going to be a close range hyper armor 3-stage attack. The attack is going to have 3 hitboxes that all hurts, and if you get hit by the first, the second 2 are guaranteed. If you get hit by the second, the third one is guaranteed. So if you get caught in it, then you're caught in it. However, after the first one, after the first attack, in order to make your character not sitting like a duck, you can either cancel it completely into grounded movements, not grounded attacks, but grounded movements, things like, dodging. You can dodge out of it and stuff like that, or you can do a aerial finisher to the attack instead. So you only get 2 attacks, and it's going to be weaker than just 2 attacks. First one, but it'll hit in the air in case somebody tried to jump your first big slam and hit you again. And it's actually inspired by a real attack. I can actually show you guys this. Okay, so here we go. This is the attack it's based off. We're going to have a big slam at the beginning, and this will have hyper armor, and that's the basic points of the attack. And then if you get hit by it, he's going to stomp on the axe, digging into the ground again for a second hit, and then rip the axe out of the ground for a big third hit. And they'll do progressively higher damage, so that the whole attack just hits like a fucking truck. It's going to have... which is the basic idea. But should the first attack land, so let's get rid of all these black parts here. So should this first attack land, to not land, and somebody tries to jump over, we'll say this is somebody who the attack missed and they try to jump over, the idea is that instead of doing the second and third hit, we'll be able to cancel it into a different finisher that affects this high cone here instead of the ground. Or we can just dodge out of it. And this attack is going to cost a lot of super. The plan that I have for it, I considered... I'll talk about that later. I considered... So one of the things I considered doing was having this only cost like 2 super to get into it, but I want this attack to hit like a truck and have a lot of consequence. And I feel like only 2 super and then costing 1 or 2 extra super for each progressive attack in this thing is not really what I want. So instead, I'm going to have it have a high introduction cost, where it costs a large amount of super, perhaps 4 or 5, in order to do the first strike, but then all of the follow-ups are free after that. Which is going to really suck if you missed your first strike and then have to dodge out of it immediately. So that's the kind of basic idea behind this super attack. And I know that's a lot to throw at you, and I don't want to type it all here. But the idea is I know what I want my attack to be, and it's technically a chain of like 4 different attack animations, right? But I consider it 1 super, and it's we'll just write chain here. And that creates our super. And after that, the only thing we have left to design, now that we have our basic attacks in mind and our supers in mind, is probably the hardest thing to create, and that is the specials. Now, specials are just going to be attacks that you can perform at any time, or perhaps under special circumstances or conditions that are similar to these attacks, but have a little bit of extra oomph in them. Perhaps it'll be a jumping attack that serves a dual purpose of jumping and then to avoid an attack and then attacking. Or it could be a large variety of things. Now, in all honesty, I don't have the special attacks that I want for Horaloo completely figured out yet. And that's where I'm probably going to leave you today, but this is where a lot of attacks with things like Ninja's substitution, for example, that's a special attack. You know, stuff like that is all going to go in here. And with that out of the way, I think that's everything that we have for today. I've gone over a lot of the stuff that I wanted to, but so thank you so much for watching, Gentles and Ladymen. Have a great day, and goodbye.
Still my heart beats again and again. I'm always searching for love with no sense of